Hello, everybody. I did my philosophical analysis on Thomas Aquinas. He is the philosophical thinker that I agreed the most with in this course, and I found all of his thoughts and philosophies to be very interesting. So that's what I wrote my analysis on. I'm sure everybody's heard of Thomas Aquinas as we read about him in this course, but I'm sure we've heard about him beforehand. And he's one of the most influential educational thinkers in all of human history. He embodied a biblical worldview. He believed that life was created by God and that God's supernatural and that God equipped people with a spiritual soul and a materialistic body. He is most known for theistic realism. But before I get into that, let's talk about kind of the background and the cultural context. So Christianity was just was entering the mainstream in the West, and there was a medieval reformation of Christianity. The Roman political and economic control was beginning to weaken, and it was being replaced by manorialism and feudalism. There was also a growing position in the culture of medieval universities, and Christianity was becoming a centerpiece of the medieval worldview. Um, and a lot of early Christians, they had the beliefs that were staples to the Christian religion. They believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that he came to earth as man, and he had both human and divine attributes. And as we've learned about in a lot of the different biblical worldview articles we've read, as well as the videos, we know that that's an extremely crucial component of having a biblical worldview. Now let's go into St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy of education, and I kind of mentioned this earlier. He was a big proponent of theistic realism. He believed that education is a process that is a lifelong process. It doesn't end at any point in a person's life. It goes on throughout their entire life. That's why he believes that people are lifelong learners. Another crucial component of Aquinas' philosophy of education and theistic realism is that not only is intellectual excellence a extremely important part of a virtuous life, but also spiritual excellence. So both of those are key components. Also, he believed that God is the main focus of education and that God is our teacher. He believed that teachers can guide students to knowledge, but that students are the ones that need to absorb and obtain that knowledge. Okay, now to kind of talk about how we put this theory into practice. So I believe he's showcased his belief in theistic realism and all the different philosophical thoughts and philosophies that he embodied. He showed them with how he lived his life. So we see this even early on in his life, that he's already starting to mold the way he thinks, mold these philosophies, and then act them out in his life. So one of the first things he wanted to do was join the Dominicans, which was a group of highly academically talented scholars, and they had a focus on theology. And this would give him the chance to showcase his knowledge, his intellect, and he was sent to study under Albert the Great at the Dominican monastery of the Holy Cross in Cologne, Germany, where he eventually would be ordained a priest. And then after this, he continued to pursue his education and get lots of different notable academic publications and credentials. He was a professor at the University of Paris. He was constantly preaching, writing, teaching, traveling, and spreading his philosophy in all these different ways. And he wrote approximately 60 different works of literature that covered all these different philosophical and theological ideas. So just impacting people throughout his entire life. So I'll kind of dive into more into a deeper analysis. So his work there's lots of similarities and differences between other educational thinkers of history, several of who we've learned about in this course. The two that kind of stick out to me were John Calvin and Confucius. So John Calvin, there's a lot more parallels between Aquinas and Calvin, most notably with regards to their biblical worldview, as to where Confucius did not have nearly as much of a biblical worldview as those two other educational thinkers. And then kind of just draw my conclusion really quick, so I don't want this video to go on too long. We're at the 6-minute mark, so I'll kind of wrap it up real quickly. So obviously we've been impacted by the philosophies of Thomas Aquinas, especially those of us that are Christian and most notably Catholic as well. So today's educational system, I believe, has benefited significantly from the teachings of Aquinas, especially Catholic schools and universities and colleges. I went to a Jesuit school, so I kind of saw this firsthand, how much his teachings can impact not only K through 12 education, but also higher education, especially at Christian and Catholic universities. But I feel like he has had less of an influence in a public school setting. It's still in a public school setting. I would say that intellectual excellence is still a crucial component of that, but spirituality and theology are not parts of the curriculum. And I kind of pointed out in my paper that up until the 1950s, public schools were allowed to teach Christianity, and theistic realism had more of a significant impact on the educational goals and curriculums of these schools. And I'm sure some aspects of that still impact the school system today, even though these schools can't have a religious affiliation. Robert Putnam, who wrote a great book called Bowling Alone, he kind of indicates that church attendance is decreasing, divorce is increasing, volunteering is decreasing, and joining organizations and clubs is also decreasing, and it has been going down since the 1950s. And in the 1950s, spirituality and religiosity were parts of the public school. So I point out that if theistic realism were influencing the educational system and curriculum in public schools as well, I believe that a lot of these problems would be mitigated and they wouldn't be nearly as severe.